Welcome to MojoPlays. I've got chocolate in my mouth. This is so unprofessional. There you go. Welcome to MojoPlays. Today we get the opportunity to look at some of my favorite Final Fantasy games, the ones that are missing a number. Whether it's set in the same universe as a mainline entry or it's its own little world, these are the 10 best Final Fantasy spin-offs. Let's go.
Before we continue, we publish content all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified of our latest videos.
Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Final Fantasy Tactics is definitely one of the more well-known spin-offs in the series, and it gets a lot of praise for good reason. But what people don't talk about enough is the follow-up game of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance on the Game Boy Advance. This game tends to get overlooked, mostly because it doesn't go quite as hard on the story as the original, but that doesn't mean it's lacking in the place it counts, the gameplay. The gameplay in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is just as strong, and in some ways even more refined than the original PS1 entry. There's a surprising amount of depth in how you build your team, manage abilities, and approach each battle. It's the kind of system that keeps you hooked once it clicks. Sure, the tone is lighter, but that doesn't make it worse, just different. But I'm not here to compare it to its original, I'm here to say it goddamn rocks on its own. Go play it. Final Fantasy Type 0.
One day, historians may refer to this as Tempus Finis.
Nonsense. This is not the beginning of the end.
If there's one thing Final Fantasy Type 0 does really well, it's variety. Instead of sticking you with a small group of characters, the game throws 14 playable members at you, and they all play completely differently. You've got King running around with dual pistols, Jack cutting enemies down with a katana, and Deuce literally fighting with a flute. A flute, you guys, it's like Final Dynasty fantasy. Every character feels unique enough that switching between them actually keeps things interesting instead of feeling like a chore. The game does sometimes force you to use certain characters, which can be a bit hit or miss depending on who you like, but it also means everyone gets their moments to shine. It's worth a visit, because the story, as well, good lord.
Look at you. I was surprised by how tall you'd gotten, Machina. When we were back in the village, you were shorter than I was.
Yeah, like I said, you haven't changed.
Final Fantasy Dimensions. Final Fantasy Dimensions is basically the kind of game fans have been asking for years. A classic style entry with the active time battle system and really nice pixel art. It feels like a throwback to the older games in the best way. The only real downside is it's stuck on mobile, which means a lot of people never even gave it a shot. Unfortunately, me included. Don't be me. Get on it now, not 16 years after you heard about it. The story follows two groups, Warriors of Light and Warriors of Darkness, after the world gets split in half. It hits all the usual beats. Crystals, monsters, and saving the world. The plot is solid, but the real highlight is the job system. Mixing abilities between jobs and experimenting with different builds is where the game shines. It's Final Fantasy 3, it's Final Fantasy 5, it's Final Fantasy Tactics, and it's awesome. Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon series.
Head for the tower in the sands.
The Mystery Dungeon series has been around for a long time, going all the way back to the early 90s. Since then, it's taken all kinds of forms, bringing in original characters like Pokemon and even Chocobos into its dungeon crawling formula. The idea sounds fun, exploring randomly generated dungeons and collecting loot, but the gameplay style isn't for everyone. It can feel simple at first, but the difficulty can be brutal, especially since dying often means losing everything. The Chocobo-focused game, starting with Chocobo's Dungeon on the PlayStation, tried to make things a bit more forgiving, but they didn't get the best reception when they first released in the West. Over time, opinions have shifted. By the time Final Fantasy Fable's Chocobo's Dungeon came out on the Wii, players were a lot more open to it, and its later remaster on modern platforms helped even more. World of Final Fantasy. A lot of Final Fantasy spin-offs lean heavily into crossover chaos, but World of Final Fantasy takes a very different approach compared to something like Dissidia Final Fantasy. Instead of focusing on intense battles and, dare I say, forced drama, this game goes for a much lighter, more playful vibe. It follows our two twin protagonists as they travel through colourful worlds, mixing classic turn-based combat with a monster collecting system that adds a fun twist to the usual formula. What really makes World of Final Fantasy stand out is its fan service, which feels okay because the whole thing is light. The game is packed with familiar faces from across the series, all redesigned in this cute chibi style that gives everything a more relaxed and goofy tone. It doesn't try to be the deepest or most complex RPG out there, and that's kind of the point.
Please, may I speak with you?
Oh, sure.
Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. The Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles series has changed a lot over the years, but there's something about that original 2003 GameCube release that still stands out, for me at least. It was built around 4-player co-op, with a group of adventurers traveling together like a proper little caravan, and that gave the whole game a really unique feel. Combat itself was pretty simple, but the real hook was how players had to work together. One person carried the crystal chalice to keep everyone safe, while the others fought enemies, and you were constantly switching roles or bunching up to survive. It sounds awkward, but in practice it actually made the whole thing feel like a shared adventure. The biggest problem was how needlessly complicated Square made the setup. Instead of just using normal controllers, every player needed a Game Boy Advance connected to the GameCube, which was honestly ridiculous. In Australia, I had to order the connectors off eBay, back when they should have been sold in stores. It sucked, but when they arrived, it changed the game, literally. Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin.
Look, the crystals can sense each other.
There's honestly a lot you could say about Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, but most of it somehow comes back to just how weirdly entertaining the game is. The game fully commits to being over the top, to being edgy, and to being just a little bit cringe, and despite what I've said about every other game on this channel that features these ingredients, this actually works. You've got this Dark Souls style combat system that feels really solid with weighty attacks and some genuinely satisfying gameplay, but then it's paired with one of the most unhinged tones the series has ever had. And then there's Jack. This man does not care about subtlety, storytelling, or literally anything that isn't punching chaos in the face.
Alright, let's keep it up.
Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII.
Zack!
Zack, focus.
The whole compilation of Final Fantasy VII has given us a ton of spin-offs and extra stories over the years, but Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII is easily the best to come out of it. Instead of focusing on Cloud, the game follows Zack Fair, giving players a look at what was happening before the events of Final Fantasy VII. It adds a lot more context to the world and to the characters, and honestly makes certain moments from the original hit even harder once you know the full story. The original PSP version definitely shows its age a bit now, but the remaster Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion does a solid job of updating things. It looks better, it plays smoother, and is way easier to access on modern platforms. But that doesn't take away from how amazing the original felt on such a small handheld console. It was revolutionary, and for many players it represented a real shift in gaming power. Who'd have thought a console in my hands could make me cry? Not me. It did though.
Shishu-ha! Ah! No! You got me!
Ha-ha! That'll teach you to mess with me. Once again, I saved Wutai.
Dissidia Final Fantasy. Forget Spider-Man No Way Home, if we're talking crossovers, Dissidia Final Fantasy is really where it's at. This 2008 spin-off throws together some of the biggest heroes and villains from across the entire Final Fantasy series and lets them fight it out, which is basically a dream setup for fans. This is the only entry on the list that I hadn't played, but during my research, there was an overwhelming player base who consider this one of the best Final Fantasy games around. So I had to rank it high, and I had to dust off the PSP and try it myself. It doesn't play like a traditional fighter, using more of a third-person action style, which makes battles feel fast and chaotic in a really good way. Seeing characters like the Warrior of Light going up against later protagonists is just pure fan service done right. The recent NT game may have missed the mark, but the original PSP games, whoa, chef's kiss. Final Fantasy Tactics. I tell you what, 1997 was a hell of a year for Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation was a game changer for tactical RPGs, and it still holds up today. Trust me, daddy, I played it this morning. It introduced players to Ivalice and delivered one of the best strategy systems the series has ever had. The level of depth in battles, team building, and the job system made it stand out not just as a spin-off, but as something that could easily go toe-to-toe with the mainline Final Fantasy games. It's one of those titles that set the bar so high that a lot of other games in the genre are still chasing it today, 2026. Good night.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from MojoPlays and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of our latest videos.